She expected you to react, to get angry, to chase, to beg for answers, but you did something different. You stayed silent, and now she can't stop thinking about you, not because you fought for her, but because you didn't. Let me explain why your silence became the loudest thing she ever heard. Silence creates emotional power in a way most people completely underestimate. In a world where everyone is constantly reacting, explaining, defending, and trying to be understood, the person who chooses silence immediately stands apart. Silence is not just the absence of words, it is the presence of control. When someone hurts you, they subconsciously expect a reaction because that reaction validates their importance in your emotional world. The moment you respond with anger, questions, or even sadness, you are confirming that they still have influence over you. But when you remain silent, you disrupt that entire dynamic. You remove the feedback they were expecting, and suddenly the emotional balance shifts. They are no longer in control of how the situation unfolds because you have chosen not to participate in the emotional exchange they were prepared for. This is where silence begins to build its power. It creates a psychological gap that words can never fill. When you speak, you provide clarity, and clarity gives comfort, even if the conversation is negative. People can process words, categorize them, and move on. But silence does the opposite. Silence creates ambiguity, and the human mind is deeply uncomfortable with ambiguity. When you don't explain yourself, when you don't react, when you don't give them a clear emotional response, their mind starts working overtime to fill in the blanks. They begin to analyze your behavior, replay past interactions, and question their own actions. The more they think, the more emotionally invested they become, and this investment happens without you saying a single word. What makes silence even more powerful is that it signals emotional discipline. Anyone can react impulsively when they are hurt, but very few people have the ability to restrain themselves and choose composure instead. This restraint communicates strength on a level that words cannot replicate. It shows that you are not controlled by your emotions, and more importantly, that you are not dependent on the other person for validation or closure. When someone realizes that they cannot provoke a reaction from you, it challenges their perception of their own importance in your life. They start to question whether they ever truly understood you, because the version of you they expected to react is no longer there. Silence also removes the opportunity for manipulation. When you engage in conversation, especially in emotionally charged situations, there is always room for the other person to twist your words, shift blame, or regain control of the narrative. But when you say nothing, you give them nothing to work with. There are no words to argue against, no emotions to exploit, no weaknesses to target. This forces them into a position where they have to confront their own behavior without distraction. Instead of focusing on your reaction, they are left alone with their thoughts, and that is where the real impact begins to take shape. Another layer of emotional power in silence comes from its unpredictability. People feel comfortable when they can predict how you will respond because predictability gives them a sense of control. The moment you break that pattern by choosing silence, you become unpredictable, and unpredictability creates tension. They don't know what you are thinking, they don't know how you feel, and they don't know what you will do next. This uncertainty keeps you in their mind because the brain naturally tries to resolve anything that feels incomplete or unclear. Your silence becomes a puzzle they cannot solve, and the more they try to understand it, the more attention and emotional energy they invest in you. At the same time, silence preserves your dignity. When you react emotionally, especially in moments of pain, there is always a risk of saying something you regret or revealing more than you intended. Silence protects you from that. It allows you to maintain your composure and keep your self-respect intact, regardless of what the other person has done. This quiet confidence is often far more impactful than any words you could have used, because it demonstrates that your sense of self is not shaken by someone else's actions. Mystery triggers obsession because the human mind is naturally drawn to what it cannot fully understand. When everything about a person is clear, predictable, and explained, there is no reason to think deeply about them. Clarity creates comfort, and comfort often leads to emotional detachment over time. But mystery disrupts that comfort. It creates a sense of incompleteness, and the mind is wired to seek completion. When someone cannot fully figure you out, your thoughts, your emotions, your intentions, they become mentally engaged in trying to solve you. This engagement doesn't happen once. It repeats over and over again, turning into a loop of curiosity that slowly evolves into obsession. When you remain silent after being hurt, you introduce that mystery into the situation. Instead of expressing your feelings or giving a predictable reaction, you leave behind unanswered questions. The other person starts to wonder what is going on in your mind. They try to interpret your silence. Does it mean you don't care? Or does it mean you care so deeply that you chose not to react? This uncertainty becomes powerful because there is no direct answer available. And when answers are not given, the mind begins to create its own versions of the truth. These imagined possibilities are often more intense than reality because they are shaped by emotions, assumptions, and overthinking. Mystery also removes emotional closure, and without closure, feelings tend to linger. When someone understands exactly why things ended or how you feel about them, they can process it and gradually move on. But when they are left without a clear explanation, they remain mentally connected to the situation. They replay conversations, analyze your behavior, and look for hidden meanings in everything you did or didn't do. This constant mental replay keeps you present in their thoughts, even in your absence. You become something they are still trying to understand, rather than something they have already figured out and moved past. Another reason mystery triggers obsession is because it challenges the ego. People like to feel that they understand others, especially those they were emotionally involved with. It gives them a sense of control and confidence in their perception. But when you become mysterious, you take that certainty away. They begin to question their own judgment. How could they not understand you? What did they miss? This self-doubt pushes them to think about you even more, because they are not just trying to understand you anymore. They are also trying to restore their own sense of clarity and control. The more they fail to do that, the deeper they fall into thinking about you. Mystery also amplifies emotional intensity because it leaves space for imagination. When everything is known, there is no room for interpretation. But when something is unclear, the mind fills in the gaps, often exaggerating emotions and possibilities. They might start imagining that you were stronger than they thought, that you moved on faster than expected, or that you never needed them in the first place. These thoughts are not based on facts, but on the absence of facts. Your silence allows their imagination to take over, and imagination is often far more powerful than reality when it comes to emotional attachment. At the same time, mystery creates a sense of distance that increases perceived value. When someone feels like they can fully access you, your thoughts, your emotions, your reactions, you become familiar, and familiarity can reduce intrigue. But when you pull back and become less available, both emotionally and mentally, you create a sense of scarcity. People tend to value what feels limited or hard to reach. Your silence and lack of explanation make you feel distant, and that distance makes them want to close the gap. The harder it becomes to understand or reach you, the more effort they put into trying, and that effort deepens their focus on you. Mystery also changes how they remember you. Instead of seeing you as someone predictable or easily understood, they begin to see you as complex and layered. This perception elevates your presence in their mind because complex things require more thought and attention. You are no longer just a part of their past. You become an unresolved experience that continues to occupy their mental space. They may move on physically, meet new people, and continue with their life. But that unanswered curiosity about you remains active beneath the surface, pulling their attention back to you repeatedly. Emotional restraint signals strength in a way that words and reactions never can, because it reflects a level of control that most people struggle to achieve. When someone hurts you, the most natural instinct is to respond immediately, whether through anger, frustration, or the need to explain yourself. These reactions feel justified, and in many cases they are, but reacting impulsively often reveals how deeply someone else's actions can influence your emotional state. Emotional restraint, on the other hand, shows that you are aware of your feelings but not controlled by them. It demonstrates that you have the ability to pause, to process, and to choose your response rather than being driven by the intensity of the moment. This kind of restraint creates a powerful impression because it is rare. Most people equate expression with strength. They believe that speaking up, confronting, or reacting proves confidence. But there is a difference between expression and control. Anyone can express what they feel in the heat of the moment, but very few can hold back when emotions are at their peak. That ability to hold back is what makes emotional restraint stand out. It shows that you are not desperate to be understood, not dependent on immediate validation, and not willing to compromise your composure for the sake of temporary emotional release. When you choose emotional restraint, you also change the dynamic of the situation. The person who hurt you expects a certain reaction because it reinforces their understanding of you. They expect anger, questions, or an attempt to fix things because those responses keep you emotionally engaged with them. But when you don't react in the way they anticipated, it disrupts their expectations. They are left without a clear sense of where they stand, and that uncertainty shifts the emotional balance. Instead of you trying to understand them, they begin trying to understand you. Your restraint forces them into a position where they have to reflect on their own actions rather than focusing on your reaction. Emotional restraint also communicates self-respect. When you don't immediately respond to being hurt, it shows that you value yourself enough not to engage in situations that diminish your dignity. You are not trying to win an argument, prove a point, or seek closure at any cost. Instead, you are prioritizing your own stability and peace of mind. This sends a clear message that your self-worth is not dependent on how someone else treats you. It shows that you are willing to walk away from emotional chaos rather than getting pulled into it. And that kind of detachment often earns a level of respect that emotional reactions cannot achieve. Another layer of strength in emotional restraint is the ability to endure discomfort without seeking instant relief. Reacting emotionally often provides temporary relief because it allows you to release what you are feeling. But that relief is short-lived, and it can come at the cost of regret, misunderstandings, or giving the other person more control over the situation. Restraint requires you to sit with your emotions, to process them internally, and to accept that not every feeling needs to be expressed immediately. This level of patience and self-control is not easy, which is why it stands out as a sign of inner strength. It shows that you are capable of handling your emotions without relying on external reactions to stabilize yourself. At the same time, emotional restraint creates a sense of unpredictability that enhances your presence in someone's mind. When you don't react in expected ways, people struggle to categorize you. They cannot easily label your behavior or predict your next move, and this lack of clarity keeps them mentally engaged. They begin to question what you are thinking, how you are feeling, and why you chose not to respond. This curiosity often leads to deeper reflection on their part because they are not receiving the usual emotional cues that help them make sense of the situation. Restraint also prevents you from giving away your emotional position too easily. When you react, you reveal your thoughts, your feelings, and sometimes your vulnerabilities. While there is nothing inherently wrong with that, it can reduce the sense of depth and complexity that others perceive in you. By holding back, you maintain a level of emotional privacy that makes you more difficult to read. This does not mean suppressing your emotions entirely, but rather choosing when and how to express them in a way that aligns with your self-respect and long-term perspective. Her guilt grows in your silence because silence removes every distraction she would normally use to avoid accountability. When you react emotionally, when you argue, defend yourself, or try to explain what she did wrong, you unintentionally give her an escape. The focus shifts away from her actions and onto your reaction. She can justify herself, minimize the situation, or even turn the blame back onto you. But when you choose silence, you deny her that opportunity. There is no argument to hide behind, no emotional chaos to dilute the situation. What remains is the reality of what she did, and she is left alone with it. Silence creates a space where her thoughts become louder. Without your voice filling the gap, her mind begins to replay the moment in detail. She starts to revisit her words, her actions, and the way everything unfolded. At first, she may try to rationalize it, convincing herself that it wasn't that serious or that you overreacted internally. But the absence of your reaction makes that justification harder to maintain. Your silence feels heavier than any argument could have been because it suggests that the situation didn't even deserve a response. That realization begins to create discomfort, and that discomfort is where guilt starts to form and grow. What intensifies this guilt is the contrast between what she expected and what actually happened. She expected you to react, to show pain, to engage in some form of emotional exchange. That expectation gave her a sense of control over how the situation would unfold, but your silence disrupts that control completely. Instead of managing your reaction, she is now dealing with the absence of one. This absence feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliarity forces deeper thinking. She begins to question why you didn't respond, and in trying to answer that question, she inevitably circles back to her own behavior. Silence also removes the immediate emotional release that arguments provide. When two people argue, even if the conversation is negative, it allows both sides to express themselves and release built-up tension. Once that tension is released, it becomes easier to move on, even if nothing was fully resolved. But silence keeps that tension intact. It doesn't give her the chance to express, defend, or resolve anything. Instead, the tension stays within her, growing over time as she continues to think about the situation. The longer it remains unresolved, the more it weighs on her, and the more her guilt deepens. Another reason her guilt grows in your silence is because it forces her into self-reflection. When you react, she can focus on you, your tone, your words, your behavior. But when you say nothing, there is nothing external to focus on. The only place her attention can go is inward. She begins to evaluate herself, her choices, and the impact of her actions. This kind of reflection is often uncomfortable because it requires honesty. Without your reaction to distract her, she has to confront the possibility that she was wrong, that she caused harm, and that she may have lost something valuable because of it. Your silence also creates a sense of distance that amplifies her awareness of your absence. When you don't engage, you are not just silent, you are emotionally unavailable. This absence becomes more noticeable over time, especially if she was used to your presence, your attention, or your reactions. The more she feels that absence, the more she associates it with what happened. She begins to connect the loss of your energy with her actions, and that connection strengthens her sense of responsibility. It's no longer just about what she did in the moment. It's about what she may have lost because of it. At the same time, silence can make her question how much she truly mattered to you. This might seem counterintuitive, but it plays a role in deepening her emotional response. If you didn't react, does it mean you didn't care? Or does it mean you cared enough to walk away with dignity instead of engaging in something beneath you? This uncertainty adds another layer to her thoughts, making her analyze not just her behavior, but your perception of her. She begins to wonder how you see her now and whether her actions changed your view of her in a way that cannot be undone. As time passes, this combination of reflection, uncertainty, and unresolved tension keeps her mentally connected to you. Your silence becomes a constant reminder of the moment she cannot fully process or escape. It lingers in her thoughts, resurfacing at unexpected times, and each time it does, the emotional weight of it grows heavier. Without closure, without explanation, and without a reaction from you, she is left carrying the full burden of what happened, and that burden gradually transforms into a deeper, more persistent sense of guilt. You became unpredictable the moment you chose not to respond in the way she expected, and that single shift changed the entire dynamic between you. Predictability is what makes people feel comfortable in relationships because it allows them to anticipate your reactions and adjust their behavior accordingly. When someone knows how you will respond, whether you'll get upset, try to fix things, or come back after being hurt, they feel a sense of control over the situation. That control gives them confidence in how far they can go, what they can say, and how much they can get away with. But when you step outside of that pattern and respond with silence or restraint, you break that sense of certainty. Suddenly, she can no longer read you, and that lack of clarity forces her to rethink everything she thought she knew about you. This unpredictability creates tension because the human mind is always trying to find patterns. When those patterns disappear, it becomes difficult to feel settled or secure. She starts to question what changed, why you didn't react the way you used to, and what it means for your feelings toward her. The absence of a familiar response becomes more noticeable than any reaction could have been. It lingers in her thoughts because it doesn't fit into the narrative she had built about you. She expected consistency, but what she encountered was something completely different, and that difference becomes the center of her attention. Being unpredictable also shifts the power balance in a subtle but significant way. When your behavior is consistent and easy to anticipate, it places you in a position where your actions can be influenced or even manipulated. But unpredictability removes that leverage. It makes it difficult for anyone to guide the situation in their favor because they no longer know how you will respond. This doesn't require you to play games or act differently for the sake of it. It simply comes from choosing not to react automatically. That pause, that decision to step back instead of stepping in, introduces a level of uncertainty that puts you back in control of your own responses. At the same time, unpredictability increases your psychological presence. When someone cannot fully understand or anticipate you, they tend to think about you more. The mind keeps returning to the situation, trying to make sense of it, trying to find a pattern that no longer exists. She replays the moment, compares it to how you used to behave, and looks for clues that explain the change. The more she searches for answers, the more attention she gives you, and that attention deepens your impact without you having to do anything at all. You become a question that hasn't been answered, and unanswered questions have a way of staying in the mind longer than resolved ones. Unpredictability also changes how she perceives your emotional state. When you react in expected ways, your emotions are easy to read and interpret. But when you don't respond, or when your response doesn't match what she anticipated, it creates ambiguity. She doesn't know whether you are unaffected, deeply affected, or simply choosing not to show it. This ambiguity can be more powerful than any clear expression of emotion because it leaves room for interpretation. She may start to assume that you are stronger than she thought, more detached than she expected, or more self-controlled than she realized. These assumptions are shaped by her own thoughts, which means they often carry more weight than anything you could have directly communicated. Another aspect of unpredictability is that it disrupts emotional routines. In any connection, patterns form over time, patterns of communication, reaction, and interaction. These patterns create a rhythm that both people become used to. When you break that rhythm, it doesn't just change a single moment, it alters the entire flow of the connection. She can no longer rely on the same emotional cues or responses, which forces her to adjust. This adjustment requires effort, attention, and thought, all of which keep her mentally engaged with you. Unpredictability also protects your emotional space. By not reacting in expected ways, you avoid getting pulled into cycles that may have previously defined the interaction. You create distance between your emotions and her actions, allowing yourself to remain grounded rather than reactive. This distance is not about detachment for the sake of indifference, but about maintaining control over how much influence someone else has over your internal state. It shows that your behavior is no longer driven by habit or expectation, but by conscious choice, which changes how you are perceived and how the situation unfolds. Walking away quietly builds respect because it reflects a level of self-awareness and emotional maturity that most people struggle to embody. When a situation becomes hurtful or disrespectful, the natural instinct is to react, to explain your side, to defend yourself, or to make the other person understand what they did wrong. But choosing to walk away without creating noise, without trying to prove a point, shows that you value your peace more than the need to be heard in that moment. It sends a message that your standards are not negotiable and that you are not willing to stay in an environment that compromises your self-respect, even if it means leaving without closure.